Welcome to ICAACT Radio, your civilian citizens dedicated to exposing domestic and international terrorism. Hello everyone, I'm Jesse Beltran, your host of ICAACT Radio, the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. I'm from the United States, and along with your co-host today, Lars Jagard of Denmark. Hello everyone, welcome back, and we would like to thank you for tuning in to United We Win and ICAACT Radio. In our last 3 episodes, we addressed the issues of electronic terrorism in America and throughout the world. Thousands of victims are suffering and are being senselessly tortured on a daily basis. They endure and seek help from the very organizations they are supposed to count on, those being their governments and their local agencies. But they do so to no avail. We know that in order to right this wrong, it will take humanity standing up against the Goliaths that are destroying our freedoms. I think back throughout history and can recall the great individuals who persevered against all odds. There were great statesmen, patriots, peacekeepers, from all walks of life. They were soldiers for true humanity and democracy. They stood up against seemingly invincible Goliaths of the world. Today I ask, where have all these heroes gone? I know they're out there. It's time to awaken the sleeping giant. Now is the time to awaken those unsung heroes. I know you're out there. Today's episode is dedicated to those unsung heroes and to remind us of what we as human beings are capable of when we work together to a common goal. Recently, I met a gentleman who exhibited such traits. It was refreshing, it was inspiring, and it was enlightening. He is 93 years young, and believe me, he can still accomplish more than most half his age. We are very proud and honored to have a very special guest. He is a retired naval officer, family man, community leader, and a soldier of truth, and author of the book, Water in My Veins. I'll read a short little intro, starting with the author's family. The book is about their arrival in America in 1640. It takes us through the Roaring Twenties to the Great Depression, where they lived in an appalling poverty, to World War II, where Ted took part in the rescue of President Kennedy and became his tent mate. His book is living history of a long journey of a nobody who became a somebody, the American way. President John F. Kennedy was born May 29, 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts, and was assassinated, sadly, on Friday, November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. We'd like you to listen to this incredible audio recording of a speech made by President Kennedy before the American Newspaper Publishers Association, where he warns the press about the secret societies that are the real power in global affairs. This was April 27, 1961, at the Waldorf Hotel in New York City.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
President Kennedy was one of our great leaders, and very few people in their lives can say that they had a direct impact or influence on the history of a great nation. And next up, folks, I'd like to introduce the author of the book, Water in My Veins, Mr. Ted Robinson. Are you there, Ted?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Ted. Welcome to the show, along with Lars Regard and myself. If you could, please, just give us a short little bio about yourself, and then what inspired you to write your book.
Well, I grew up, as you've already said, in New York City, and I came to California after the war because I love athletics. I'm a tournament tennis player, and we were poor, but my mother got me a tennis racket with blue chip stamps, and I played in the New York City boys finals when I was 12 and lost in the first round, but then I later played for Duke University, and I still play, and I'm 93. I also love to ski, and skiing out in California, you're skiing at 12,000 feet, where back in the East you're skiing at about 3,000 feet ice bowl and slush bowl. And so we moved to California really for sports, because I came through here en route from the South Pacific twice through California, both in February, and both I found people playing tennis outside, and you just don't do that in New York City. Then I retired about 1980, and since then my wife and I have been doing a great deal for civic and charity work. My wife's been the Woman of the Year in Sacramento for all the help she gives. She's the longest continual volunteer at the Kiwanis Family House that takes care of terminally ill children here in Sacramento. And I'm the park commissioner. My book is titled Water in My Veins because I not only spent the whole World War II in the Navy, I now am the park commissioner in charge of the American River Parkway. And Sutter put his fort in Sacramento because it was the confluence of the only two really big rivers in Sacramento, which is the American River and the Sacramento River. And we have some 18 parks in that area, and I'm in charge of it. I'm 93, and I'm still very active. And I've always worked for nothing because I grew up so poor. I practically grew up in the New York City parks. And I decided if I ever amounted something, I was going to do something for parks big time, and that's what I'm doing. So here I am. Next question.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have met your wife. She's a very, very lovely woman, and I can tell you, these two folks have more energy than most 21-year-olds. And I've shaken Mr. Robinson's hand, and I can tell you it's a very foreign grip, and I hope to be as healthy and as vibrant as he is when I reach your age, Ted. My question would be is, you wrote this book, and we'd like to get into what is the background, what is the incipitus of what inspired you to write your book?
Well, two things. One, I had a lovely woman that I worked for who was president of the Tree Foundation here in Sacramento. She was a volunteer. She was vice president of a bank, and when I retired, they asked me if I would help with the Tree Foundation, and I got very involved with that, and we planted over 1 million trees in Sacramento, and in fact, we made Sacramento Tree City, USA for 12 years in a row, and we're very proud of that. She heard a couple of my speeches, and she said, "Your speeches are just magnificent. You were head of the biggest speakers bureau in California, not the United States," which I was for Pacific Telephone. She said, "You've got to write a book. It's only for your kids." And I said, no, I'm having too much fun skiing and playing tennis. And meanwhile, the head of the Associated Press here in Sacramento had heard about me, and he interviewed me, and he wrote a wonderful article. It was true. Every piece of it was correct. And because of that, one day, this same Associated Press guy said, you know, the History Channel now wants to do a piece on you. But he says, I'm kind of suspicious of them. They're not doing it themselves. They hired some schlock outfit here in San Francisco to do it. And he said, I know, I'm in the press. I'm in the media. I'm with the Associated Press. He said, I know what the media is looking for. They're looking for controversy, always for controversy. And he said, I'm worried. So I said, oh, well, if the History Channel's involved, I said, that's got to be okay. And he said, well, Ted, I think you're a little naive, but do you mind if I sat in on the interview? Well, the outfit that did it, whose name I won't mention, they're from San Francisco. They no longer exist. We actually put them out of business. I'll tell you how it happened. They sent 3 guys out, and the Associated Press guy sat in with it, and I immediately found out they were trying to work me into a corner to say something bad about Jack. They kept trying to get me into a corner, and I was very clever about getting out of it. And so I signed off on the thing without even looking at it. All the Associated Press guy said, Ted, I think you're making a mistake. And sure enough, about a half a year later, he said, were you watching TV last night? And I said, why? He said, it's on. You're on. The History Channel put you on, and I caught it right at the beginning. So he said, I've recorded it. I'll bring it right over, and you will be wild. And I brought it over, and I could not believe what they had done to me. They had taken parts of sentences and cut me off. So I called them right away. I talked to the vice president of the History Channel. I said, how could you do such a thing? She said right off, she said, have you ever heard of the First Amendment? And so, yes, I've heard of the First Amendment. And they said, well, do you know what really pays in television? And I said, what do you mean? Well, she said, do you think anyone would watch our program if Jack Kennedy was displayed as a little Boy Scout helping an old lady across the street? Who the hell would watch it? This is exactly the kind of thing she said. And she said, so we have to put in things people want to hear about. I had a huge battle with her, and she wouldn't do anything about it. So I found out that the head of the A&E network owns the History Channel, and I went to the CEO of the A&E network, and I said, have you seen this piece of junk that the History Channel has put out? He said, no, I haven't. He said, please watch. I said, please watch it and call me right away. And he did, and he said, yeah. He said, that's pretty bad. He says, what can we do to make you happy, Commander? And I said, well, you can let me at least finish my sentences. And so they said, okay, we'll redo it. Well, I said, don't put it on till I see it. Well, they redid it, and I looked great, just great. But they still totally destroyed Kennedy with the other witnesses they had, one of who was Paul Fay, who was his best friend, who became Undersecretary of Navy under Kennedy. And another one was a guy from New Jersey. All 3 of us had been out the night of August 1st, 1943. We'd been there. We'd seen what happened. And all 3 had been interviewed, and all 3 were wild about what they found happened. So anyway, I told the head of the History Channel, we're really going after you. So I called the Chief of Staff of the United States Navy. I called Teddy Kennedy, who was still alive. And I called a guy who was head of our Peter Tear, our alumni group in PT boats, Peter Tear standing for PT. And he was a #1 attorney in Los Angeles. He's won thousands of cases. And he said, Ted, let me warn you, I've won 600 cases here, but I've never won a First Amendment case. He said, unfortunately, these media can get away with anything. He said, I don't know what you're going to do. Well, thank God, head of the Navy went after the A&E network, and they told them, we're never going to give you any information again, ever, unless you take this whole thing off the air. And they did. So then I found out they had made CDs of this the first one, the worst one, and sent them to libraries and schools for $19.90. You can get the whole thing about Kennedy and what a bum he was. So I then knew I had to write a book. And you will find in the acknowledgments in my book, it gives that the reason in plain English that a History Channel, in a sense, forced me into it because I had to somehow clear Jack's name. I had also by that time found there were 6 Mommy Dearest books written by people who were never in the South Pacific, never in the Navy, never in World War II, never seen a PT boat, that all said Jack Kennedy was a bum, and I knew I had to do something. Those are the 2 reasons I wrote the book, and it's in the acknowledgments.
That's a pretty amazing story, and it goes to show how you can't always believe what's in mainstream media. And particularly when we refer to the History Channel, most people look at it, and most viewers look at it as a very reputable organization.
That's right.
Yeah. So I commend you for coming forth, being inspired to write the book. It's unfortunate it was done that way, but I think it gave you every opportunity to portray the truth. Yeah. Just for our viewers, can you describe what a PT boat is made out of and why it was designed that way?
We were in effect the SEALs of World War II. To get into PT boats, you had to volunteer. You had to sign a statement that you were going to take a little wooden boat made of 7-ply mahogany wood, no armor plate whatsoever, no defense whatsoever. The only defense you had was your speed, and you were going to attack Japanese destroyers and battleships and cruisers with that little boat, and your only chance was to go in there, sneak in the best you could, fire your torpedoes, try to sink them, and then try to get out alive. Turned out to be tremendously effective in World War II, not at first, as you'll find out as we go on. The outfit that can stop the enemy from bringing in ammunition and reinforcements and food and medicine, all the things it takes to fight a war. If you can stop the enemy's supply line, you've got them licked. And our job was to do that the entire Pacific War. In fact, the entire World War II, both in the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and the Pacific, PT boats were used for that. And they operated mostly at night so we could sneak in and do our little thing and try to get out alive.
Can you go ahead and explain to our listeners how John F. Kennedy came into the Navy, what he was in charge of, and just give us the scenario just before he...
All right. Jack Kennedy's first job in the United States Navy was in charge of an LMD, which is, in Navy terms, a large mahogany desk. Back in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, nice and safe, sitting back there shoving around papers and vouchers, which incidentally what most people do during war. There's only a small percent ever get in the kind of combat we were in. But he was doing that, and he volunteered on his own, not his old man, as a lot of people claim, because his old man couldn't do it. Jack had to go in there and do it himself. And Jack went in and signed up to go into PT boats. And believe me, when you knew that, you were, in a sense, the kamikazes of World War II, the American kamikazes. You knew what you were getting into. So he then came out to join us, and he immediately got a terrible taste of combat. He arrived in Guadalcanal. Our base was in Florida Island, which was hidden over behind Tulagi Island across the bay from Guadalcanal, and we had our boats hidden in the swamps in native villages because the enemy, the Japanese, had 22 airfields within 100 miles, and we had just captured one. They just controlled everything, so we couldn't do anything in the daytime, but we were very effective at night because it's hard for planes way up in the air to see boats down in the darkness in the water where there were no running lights and no lighthouses and so on. So Jack arrived on August 5th, and the day he arrived, the Japanese sent down 195 planes to attack the LST, landing ship tank, that he arrived in. And they did it for two reasons. One, they were absolutely couldn't believe that an American ship would try to do anything in daytime. They just didn't do that. And secondly, the real reason was that Admiral Yamamoto, who incidentally made the attack on Pearl Harbor and who had become the head admiral of the entire Japanese Navy, had arrived in Rabaul. And Rabaul was the great Japanese base just north of Guadalcanal, from whence they sent all their destroyers, their airplanes. Everything was out of either Truk or Rabaul. And they knew that Admiral Yamamoto was coming to inspect Rabaul, their base. And so they thought they would show him they could put 195 planes in the air all at once. And, of course, they didn't do it because they knew the future president of the United States was on that LSD, but that was the only target they had. They just wanted to show the admiral how they controlled everything. Well, our Air Force, what little Air Force we had, which is in those early days, just a handful of planes, was smart enough to circumvent all those Japanese planes coming down and got past them and went up and shot down Yamamoto, the head admiral of the whole Japanese Navy. A lot of people don't know that. The same day that Jack Kennedy arrived in Guadalcanal, we killed their head admiral that had done the whole Pearl Harbor thing and the whole rest of the thing. So anyway, you'd think Jack, having just arrived, would be just really nervous and really upset by seeing nothing but enemy airplanes. Instead, he did survive. They never did sink that LST, and they did shoot down 1-0. The LST shot down to 0. I think they had so many planes, they were getting in each other's way. And Jack came over to our base. First thing he said, fellas, are those planes with a red meatball on the wings our guys or their guys? And because he was kidding, we knew it. Well, he said, no, they're their guys. He said, oh, thank God we shot down the right one. The guy was already kidding. You'd think he'd be a nervous wreck. But we all began to admire him right off, that he was a pretty cool customer. Next question.
You're describing how he came into and what his first experience was in your region. Can you go ahead and describe the incident where he was out in the PT boats, how the accident happened, and in your book it talks about it very, very elegantly.
Well, what happened was we got all our intelligence from coast watchers, who I thought were the bravest guys in World War II. They were mostly Australians, New Zealand, or Brits, because the Solomon Islands were owned by the British. And they were all covered with palm trees, and most of the income was from palm olive soap. They were the managers of the copra plantations from whence they worked with the natives, the Australians and so on, and they asked them to go back in as our intelligence. And we put them way behind enemy lines. We would put them ashore at night in a little Avon raft in the dark. They'd paddle ashore. They already were very familiar with the island we put them on because they had been the plantation manager. But they'd always give us a letter and say, see if you can get this home to the little wife, and that was usually their goodbye letter. They had a life expectancy of 2 to 4 months, and they knew it. The Japanese eventually would get crosshairs on their radio signals. But anyway, so the night of August the 1st, 1943, we got a message from the Coast Watchers that the Japanese were sending 5 heavy destroyers loaded with almost 1,000 troops for a major reinforcement of Munda airstrip. Now, we were trying to capture, we were asking our Marines and Army, who we love those guys, to capture our second airstrip, first airstrip in Guadalcanal, and now we'd have 2, and they would only have 21. So we would even things up a little bit. And so we decided we'd have to go in and try to stop the 5 destroyers. Well, my boat was under repair at that time. So anyway, my skipper says, Robbie, why don't you go up the line and get involved in that attack so you'll know the area when our PT-118 is fixed. And I'll take the PT-118 back down to Guadalcanal, which is now our rear area, which is the only place where we have a floating dry dock where we can get under the boat and repair it properly. And I went ashore, and I went in to report to Branningham, the skipper of Squadron 5, and he said, Robbie, you've had more experience than we have. Your squadron was out early than us. Would you be my radar officer on the lead boat? I said, oh, yes, I'd be glad to. And you don't say anything but that, incidentally, when the commanding officer asks you to do something in the Navy, okay? So I went in on the lead boat. We made the initial attack. We're all out there at once, and we would transfer boats and so on. So anyway, we made our attack, and after we made our attack and got out alive, and that's a long story how horrible those attacks are, we went off to the other side of the Blackett Strait, and we saw this huge explosion in the darkness just south of us, and we thought, well, Jack Kennedy's in a boat about there. Maybe he or one of the other boats down there. We had actually 12 boats in that attack. One of them must have got a hit on the magazine of one of the destroyers. Our torpedoes must have missed, but, well, it wasn't until the next morning we found out that the boat nearest Jack said, no, he said Jack got rammed. He said we were going right next, he was on this guy was on a 162 boat. He said we were going back and forth desperately looking for the enemy in the total darkness. And suddenly 2 Japanese destroyers came at high speed right at us, and they rammed Jack. The second boat tried to ram me, which was standard practice, and we just missed us. But the explosion on Jack's boat was so huge, nobody could have lived. We carried 3,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline. So he said, no. So we had a funeral for Jack the next day. And it wasn't until a week later that the 2 natives, Melanesian natives, paddled for 30 miles with a coconut, not a jacket scratched, 11 still alive, send help, JFK. And they handed it to me. And I questioned the natives. I brought them to our underground operations hut. Everything we had was underground. Everything above ground was blown to bits. Branningham again turned to me. He says, Robbie, would you like to go in on the rescue boat? Well, when a commanding officer asks you to do something in the U.S. Navy, you say, yes, sir. And I did say yes, sir, and I did it for 2 other reasons. One, I like Jack, and 2, I thought it might be a little easier line of work, although it was a very dangerous mission to go 30 miles behind enemy lines, when there was a high possibility that natives could be in the pay of the Japanese, and this was all a setup. But I thought it would probably be maybe a little easier mission than what we were doing out there every night. We eventually lost, of our 12 boats in Squadron 6, we lost all but 2. Of our 30 officers, only 5 of us lasted the whole year. They weren't all killed. Some of them were wounded. Others went Section 8, and they had malaria and everything else. And so we knew that Jack was still alive, and we got in touch with Evans, who was the Coast Watcher, hidden in Coolangatta, the Australian Coast Watcher, and he sent a couple of natives across the Blackett Strait to where Jack Kennedy apparently was, according to the natives, on a little island called Plum Island. And he sent him a British Enfield rifle to make a signal to tell us where he was. And secondly, he sent some food. And so we went up and we picked up Jack, and I got to intrude something very funny here. He was in terrible shape. He had terrible gasoline burns. His feet were cut to shreds trying to save his men, crawling across the coral reefs and all alone, trying to flag us down on subsequent nights when we came through that area. When Jack finally paddled out alone to make it sure it was us, I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Where in the hell have you guys been? I've been at this bus stop for a whole week now." Still kidding, under this circumstance. Well, we picked him up, and I was the first to talk to Jack. I was the first to talk to Lenny Tom, his executive officer, who was an All-American football player from Ohio State. and the rest of his crew as to what happened in the week that I wasn't there. But I was the first to talk to his enlisted men, his executive officers, that a lot of them were dying at the time of starvation. They hadn't eaten for a week. They were all burned with terrible gasoline burns. They were in terrible shape, and they tell the truth. And they told us one at a time what happened. Jack decided he had one chance to save his men. What happened? That destroyer came and rammed him so hard. I wish we had pictures of this for your show. That the aft end of the boat immediately sunk, where the engines were, the torpedoes, all the weight. But the bow of the boat stayed floating. But it was hit so hard by this destroyer that all the men were thrown to the port, into the water, except Jack, who was hanging onto the steel bar at the helm, where he was up at the helm. He was thrown against that steel bar, and his radioman, who was next to him, was thrown against him, and that ruined his back for the rest of his life. You know, he had back trouble the whole time he's president, until the day he died. His men were screaming in pain in the flaming gasoline from the explosion. Those boats carried 3,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline. And so there was a tremendous fire that luckily, Jack said, the bow of that destroyer was going so fast it carried the flaming gasoline slightly away from the wooden hull. That's what saved them. But the men were thrown out into the gasoline, and then the radioman pipes up and said, Mr. Kennedy, like a damn fool, he said, who could have stayed safe on the boat, no gasoline burns, dove into the flaming gasoline and dragged his men one at a time back to the hull of the boat. And they all clung to the boat that next night, and the next morning they found the hull was floating directly towards Kolomogara, where the Japanese had 40,000 troops. So Jack knew he had to do something. So the next night, he could have swam ashore for 2 miles at night alone, which was tough enough in the darkness, already burned himself by that time with gasoline burns. Instead, he decided he would save one of his men who was dying. He took the man's life jacket and his teeth and put the man on his back. The man was bleeding, which attracted sharks. The South Pacific is full of sharks, especially at night, with bleeding. So he was signing his death warrant just doing that, but luckily the sharks never attacked him. But he towed that man at night for 2 miles, and both of them arriving totally exhausted on this little plum island across from Kolomogara, away from the Japanese. And the rest of the men made some wreckage, rafts out of the wreckage, and they all got over there. And then Jack got his men together. He said, there's one way I can try to save you. I'm the best swimmer. He said, I used to be on the swim team at Harvard. That's the correct pronunciation. I'm from New England, Harvard. So he said, I'm going to crawl and swim and stumble across the reefs for miles to get out into Little Ferguson Passage, where our ships came, our PTs came through on subsequent nights. We came through there every night, a little place called Ferguson Passage, only a mile away. So he knew there were terrible reefs all around these islands. He knew the very strong current between Ferguson Passage, between the open sea and Blackett Strait. He knew there'd be high winds, but he got out there and he thought, maybe I can save my guys. And he paddled out there and stumbling and crawled across the reefs. His feet were soon in shreds. He was in shreds. He was cut. He was exhausted. He was starving. They had nothing to eat for a whole week. They licked the water off the leaves of the tree, is hoping to get some bird guano to give them some nitrates, give them some strength. He did it night after night. He never, ever asked his executive officer to do it. It was far too dangerous. He never asked his enlisted men. He said, no. He said, Lenny, Lemmy Ton, being an executive officer, you take care of the guys. I'm going to get you help. And Jack went out night after night. Well, we never saw him because we were always looking up, because when we went through Ferguson Passage every night, the Japanese dropped parachute flare after parachute flare to blind us. And then they would each had 3 100-pound bombs to drop on us. So we were all looking up in very high waves. You don't see a little guy helplessly in the waves trying to wave and attract your attention at night, so we never found him. Every one of his crew thought he was a terrific guy.
That's just an incredible story. All the obstacles that everyone had to overcome. It's just an amazing story, and I can see why you wanted to set the book straight. We understand after the rescue of President Kennedy, you became his tent mate. Lars, did you have a question?
Well, actually, I have a comment.
Yes.
The way you describe it, he was actually living, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. He was actually.
Well, you haven't heard half of what this guy did. He was out there. That's just one of the things.
My question is, did he ever indicate that he had any presidential aspirations when you were his tent mate?
No. The reason was that none of us thought we would live. I haven't said much of anything about me, but on my boat, everybody was killed and wounded, but 3 of us eventually. In fact, within 8 weeks of when I arrived at Guadalcanal, 3 months before Jack, my skipper had his head blown off right in front of me, and I became a skipper right away. And also my best friend and PT's Ralph Richards, who was skipper of the 116 boat, he had already gone crazy. They had already sent him back down the line because he had lost his mind even before I got there, because he didn't even recognize me when I arrived at the front. So you don't talk about, hey, I'm going to be president someday, when it wasn't going to be a someday. We were watching every night. We were losing people, and it would be absolutely absurd for him to say, oh, I'm going to be the next president of the United States. We'd say, hell, none of us ever going to get back to the United States. And actually, very few of us ever did. So, next question.
If you had to give your overall view on JFK, what would that be?
Well, what happened is a month of the day after we rescued him, I lost my boat not 30 miles behind enemy lines, but 70 miles behind enemy lines. So close to the Japanese we had just been attacking, we could hear them talking. And all they had to do was wade ashore, and they had 24,600 troops on that island, where we got 70 miles north, where we were all slammed in there together. And all they had to do was wade ashore and open up with their artillery. And how we got out of that mess, you got to read the book. And that very exciting chapter. And that's why when they stuck me in the tent with Jack, and we had both just lost our boats, and we under similar circumstances. And that's when I really got to know what he was like as a person. We were in there for about 3 months, 2.5 months alone. I was there when he was in such terrible shape, just terrible. He had malaria. He had terrible back trouble. His feet were cut to shreds. In fact, the picture I took of him holding the cane was taken 3 or 4 months after the crash, and he could finally stand. And he got his orders to go home. He was in bad shape. And he ripped them up, and he said, no, I want to go back up the line. And I said, Jack, give me those damn things. Put my name on them. I'll go home. Well, they sent us both back up the line again. But he volunteered to go back up the line. He didn't have to. He could have gone home. Would have you gone home? Most people I know would have gone home. Next question.
Yeah, did he ever talk about his family, or did you in general talk a lot about
family? Yeah, very good question. He never talked about Bobby or Teddy. He hardly ever talked about his father. He talked a lot about his mother, Rose, and his retarded sister, who some of you know just died a few years ago. And the reason for that is when men, I don't know how many of you have been living with men alone, nothing but men, for a whole year, and in dreadful, we were living in dreadful conditions. We never saw a white woman for a year. We never had a hot meal in a year, and we'd never been in a room with four walls. We lived in native shacks, palm farm huts with the natives, hidden in the jungles with our boats hidden in the swamps. And when you will live a life like that, and every night somebody was dying, you want to think of home, you think of your mother, you think of your wife or a little girl, or something clean, something decent. I know I thought more of my mother than anybody. What would my mother must be going crazy. And I was not only out there, my brother was in General Patton's tank corps as a tank commander going clean across Europe. But that was a year later. But anyway, my mother went through living hell thinking we'd never get home alive.
Did you actually ever meet him after he became president or after the war?
No, but I kept in constant contact with him right up to the time that he died in Dallas. He invited us to the White House, but I was bringing up 3 daughters, plus my wife's sister, plus we were taking care of 8 poor girls. We always do charity work, my wife and I. I had, by that time, a very big job with Pacific Telephone. Yeah. In fact, I was the head of the biggest speakers bureau in the United States for the whole West Coast. But anyway, he invited us to the White House, and I unfortunately missed it because one of my many daughters or many people we were bringing up was having a high school graduation, and I thought my kids came first, and Jack understood that. Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to our listeners? You know that our fight is about telling the truth, making sure that the truth is told no matter what. What have you learned in this experience, and what advice would you give to those of us who are fighting for the truth?
I, first of all, hate to tell you in front of all these people, but I admire you with what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring out a story that has to be told. I didn't know that till we met recently. I found out from the History Channel, my experience with that the press is sure pretty low on the truth. They are looking. All you have to do is look at your magazine racks and your grocery stores. They're after the sex, violence, and controversy. That's and when I go on my speeches, the first question I am always asked, without exception, by the press is, tell me about Jack and the girls.
Okay, Ted, we're going to be closing here soon. The book is Water in My Veins, The Pauper Who Helped Save a President. For all you listeners who are interested, Ted, how can someone obtain your book?
Well, it's 6 places on the Internet. If you are on the Internet, you could go to the publisher, which is Merriam, MERREIAM-press.com. Scope down to Water in My Veins by Ted Robinson and order the book from them. So if they want it autographed, they can get in touch with me. If they want it from Merriam, Merriam will sell it to you. I think they're going to be about 32. They're selling it for $27.50, but they add shipping charges and handling charges and all that stuff, and
okay,
it gets up a little higher than.
Yeah, we'll put that link up during the airing of the show.
I didn't get much chance to say stuff about you, but you guys keep doing what you're doing because I'm glad somebody's trying to do something about it.
Well, we believe President Kennedy. There's no way if he was around today or he still had any influence whatsoever that these types of things would be happening. But,
it's very upsetting. I find this whole electronic world is revealing a whole bunch of secrets about even naive little kids get on there with Facebook talking about themselves, and the next thing they're getting a lot of calls of bad people.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It opens up the door. We're in a society where we're trying to protect people from terrorism, but they don't reveal the aspects of that and how easily it is to hack into the technology and actually give the upper hand to terrorists. And that's a whole new segment that we could talk about. But anyhow, that's again, I appreciate your time. We thank.
Good luck.
I just want to say I'm very pleased you had time for us.
Oh, Yes.
And, it's been a great honor to meet you and hear what you had to say about this, to correct history a bit here.
Yeah, Ted, again, we thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back again. There's so much that we didn't get to cover, but maybe we can do that in another episode if you're up to it.
Right.
We'll be opening up our lines, our call-in lines for your questions. And those of you on the chat rooms, please forward your questions. Lars and myself will be more than happy to answer anything that you put forth before us. So lines are now open.
While we wait for your calls, we are going to hear a little bit more of the Kennedy speech we started the show with.
That also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share. And that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Well, welcome back, listeners. Man will be what he was born to be, free and independent. Boy, did President John F. Kennedy ever get it right. And that's our struggle, and that's our fight for today, folks. That's why it's important that we bring forth these unsung heroes, such people such as Ted Robinson. Without the help of brave men and women, there would be no opportunities where we would hear these great speeches, these great words of wisdom, these great outlines on how society should be and what we believed and were raised it to be. A couple of questions. There was a question that came over on the chat room about President Kennedy's back. If you weren't listening, they wanted to know how he came to being having his back problem. And Lars, do you want to recite? I know it was covered, but do you want to recite what Ted said?
Basically, he got hurt when he was stuck on the boat when it was ran over by a destroyer. And he was swung back and forth together with another person on the boat. And this haunted him until the day he died, basically.
Yes, and just a great story, great individual, Ted. It was just so pleasant to meet in person and to interview. And that's what this episode is about, folks. It's about the unsung heroes and where are they today? We know you're out there. We just need to band together so that we can preserve what we're fighting for, and that's our rights and freedoms that are being whittled away. We can speak on the NDA, the National Defense Amendment Act, where you can be detained and held indefinitely without trial here on American soil, which goes against every right and liberty that we're supposed to have. Any comments, Lars?
No, I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
But Kennedy basically summed it up very, very nicely and very precisely. It's about our freedoms, the things we are up against. These are huge entities that are undermining the constitutions and the basic rights we have been fighting for 100 years. The pretense is that we are still sending troops abroad to all kinds of foreign countries to fight for the peoples there, to gather exactly those rights, and now they're taking them away from us. This is what the struggle is ultimately about.
Yeah, and folks, we need those great whistleblowers. And any names come to mind that stick out in our current times, Lars?
Well, yes, we need people like Bradley Manning, and make sure that those kind of people who are exposing crimes are seen as heroes and not villains, as it's the case today. Because what he is basically just a decent individual with the right moral ethic values, who did everything in his power to alert authorities to the crimes that were committed, and when nobody listened, he released the information. And we need those kind of people if we are going to survive and win this battle for our freedoms, our democracies, our constitutions, and even our countries.
Yeah, folks, what we're facing now is a time never before seen. You are either going to be completely enslaved because you're going to allow our rights to be taken away, or you're going to stand up and you're going to fight for what is rightfully ours. And that's the right to be human, the right to have free thinking, the right to be free from electronic terrorism, from invasion of our privacies, the right to ensure that the future of our children is preserved. We're seeing all types of things with the microchipping, the technologies that are out there to influence our judgments. All these things are all atrocities that we must stop. And again, this is domestic terrorism, international terrorism, and the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. What we set out to do is to ensure that we are able to help those victims who otherwise would be victims of the system produce objective evidence in order to fight this crime and make a wrong right.
It's not very long ago, I think it's this year, it was revealed that the US military-industrial complex was using PSYOPs, military-trained PSYOPs, to influence politicians. Unbelievable, and it's completely unacceptable. And now they've actually passed a bill in Congress. I don't know what those people are, but to me they seem completely mind-controlled. They have passed a bill where they legalize the use of PSYOPs on the American people. So you'll never ever be able to tell whether or not they are lying or not. It will allow them to lie straight to your face. Of course, we know politicians have done that all along, but now they are legalizing it.
And that's the horrible situation we're facing. Basically, what this means is democracy a reality? Is freedom a reality? Or is it just an illusion that's purposely constructed in order to get us to believe a false truth? In closing, I would like to say this to our listeners. This is from Tags of Heroes. Mother Teresa has been a hero to many, as well as Mahatma Gandhi, Clara Barton, Martin Luther King Jr. Back in the 1950s and 60s, a hero to kids was everywhere was Superman. When George Reeves first donned that famous red and blue outfit with the big S across his chest, could he have ever imagined the impact he would have had many years later? He has done the Superman character proud. Christopher Reeve, who also played Superman, was also a hero. A tragic fall from a horse elevated him from on-screen hero to real-life hero. Since our country has been at war, many heroes have emerged. To all the servicemen who have bravely served our country, I tip my hat and say thank you. To those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for humanity, I ask you to look in the mirror and ask yourself, who is your hero? What were the traits of those who you're thinking about? I bet many of you know a person who is an unsung hero. I bet as you continue to reflect and look in the mirror, you may be surprised, for this is one of the few times that in life, no matter what you believe or say or do, the truth will always come back to you. It's time to awaken the truth, and the truth is you. We must stand together and right the wrongs. As the late John F. Kennedy would say, an error does not become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. Until next time, Thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to Dave of United We Win and Karen of United We Strike, and all of you. For if it was not for all of us collaborating together, none of this would be possible. And I would like to believe that nothing is impossible.